Hello and welcome to Coffee Chats. I'm Morgan.
And I'm Sarah, and this is a discussion of Me and Earl and the Dying Girl by Jesse Andrews.
So we had a lot of thoughts on this, and we haven't really planned out this video, but we have a lot of plot points that we are pretty opinionated on, so we thought that we would just jump into it. I think that one thing that I have to say that I mentioned in our spoiler-free review, which will be linked down below, Greg oftentimes has a really difficult time making other characters seem human, I think. Greg is pretty fleshed out, and Greg is actually quite self-aware, but Greg has such a hard time feeling empathy for other characters, I think. I think this is really an impediment with his relationship to Earl. With Earl, Greg is very limited in his perspective of him, and Earl's kind-heartedness shows through a lot of the time, even through Greg's limited perspective, but Greg often characterizes Earl as kind of a thug all the time, which is really saddening because there is a lot more to Earl than just that.
And I feel like this, almost dehumanization of the other characters is even more so true with Rachel, because we see nothing of Rachel. I couldn't tell you anything about what Rachel likes beyond the fact that she has posters of male actors in her room, and she laughs a lot.
Yeah, Rachel seemed like a weird teenage girl stereotype sometimes, and that, didn't like it.
What really bothered me about her is it almost seemed like she only existed to affect Greg. We only saw her in a brief flashback with them together at Hebrew school and how that affected Greg. And then you don't hear anything about her until she comes back up because she has leukemia. And then Greg's forced to spend time with her. And it was very weird. It made me uncomfortable that she was so one-sided.
And I don't feel like it would have been that much of a burden on the author to include a little bit more detail when it comes to Rachel. It's not that hard to flesh out a person. She didn't need to be this extraordinary dynamic character. We just wanted her to seem like a human.
Also, I felt like there were plenty of opportunities for it, especially when they were making that, video documentary. I guess there was, some point to the fact that they really couldn't find anything about her. But at the same time, maybe they could have found, a little bit more, maybe ask Rachel a little bit about her childhood, That was a very easy spot to just put some of that in there.
One thing that I loved about the book that is a standout moment to me when it comes to Greg's sense of humor is when he's describing all of his past relationships with girls, and you see just how much of a failure Greg Gaines is when it comes to normal socialization.
Even more so than, his regular awkward conversation with people, which were very uncomfortable from a reading standpoint. But that was really good. That was a good scene. My personal favorite section of that was the girl he was just mean to for a week because he thought he was, flirting by just being really rude to her, and he ends up making her cry. And I get that, sometimes when girls get picked on at school, their parents are like, oh, he just has a crush on you. So I guess that's what Greg was going for, but
he literally just beat her down so much that she's probably emotionally handicapped for the rest of her life. One scene that was just the antithesis to all of the good humor we talked about is this stupid alien barf scene. What kind of humor was that? My brothers are 14 years old, and I think that even they have a more mature sense of humor than that. Greg just goes on about alien barf forever, and
then everybody at the table is laughing at it, and I'm like, It's not funny. It's just really awkward. One thing that I thought would have made this book a lot better is if there are multiple perspectives, if it was Greg, Earl, and Rachel, because then Earl and Rachel could have been a lot more fleshed out. And also, it seemed like there's probably a lot going on that we didn't get to see. I felt like Earl and Rachel probably had some interesting interactions that we missed, especially that week where Greg was in the hospital because he broke his arm. I know Earl spent a lot of time with Rachel during that time, and I would have liked to see more of that.
So a couple of characters that we haven't talked about yet are two more minor characters, but that is Greg's dad and the teacher. Do you remember his name?
No.
I don't.
No.
But the teacher. They're both actually, I feel like, very interesting characters, and arguably two of the most well fleshed out characters aside from Greg. I feel like you got to appreciate them as multifaceted, interesting people.
Even though they were barely in it.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought his teacher especially was very well done, because you got his kind of like weird quirks, but also that he clearly cared a lot about Greg and Earl and wanted Greg to do well in school, even though he was dealing with this big issue in his life. I thought he was really well done.
Another thing that I have to mention is the scene where they get high.
That's great.
That was so funny. It was the other funniest scene, and I thought it was really funny that for so long they thought that their teacher had drugged soup.
Yeah.
And then eventually they were like, oh no, actually that's not drugged.
Because it actually bothered me for a while. I was like, are we never gonna bring this back up? Like, this is kind of like a weird thing that happened. Just kidding, we had brownies that morning. Another thing that I would have liked to see more of was Rachel's reactions to the movies. The movies were kind of a weird part of the book, because they're at the same time one of the most important parts, but they kind of didn't really affect the characters as much as they seemed like they should have. Like, Rachel apparently really loved watching their movies, and that made her feel better, but you didn't really get to see any of that. And then when they made her a movie and showed it to her, she didn't really respond to it. And it was just strange, because it seemed like they should have had a bigger impact than they did.
One of my very least favorite scenes is actually at the end of the book, right before the epilogue, and it's the scene where Greg and Earl go and eat the pho, and they're just talking about things and kind of wrapping it all up. And the scene itself is fine. I think it's kind of funny, but it gets to a point where Greg and Earl are talking about their futures, and Greg is like, maybe I should go to film school. I think he's still deciding at that point, and Earl is just like, yeah, I probably won't have much of a future. I'm probably going to end up working like fast food, maybe I'll get a manager position, and that's it. And Greg's reaction is just, okay, cool. And I feel like he could have done a little bit more than that. It's not realistic to say that, like, Earl is going to go on to do the greatest things in the world, but I feel like Greg maybe could have been like, maybe we could take your movies and, like, send them into some schools and see if you can get in maybe a year late or something. Like, it might be really good. You can probably qualify for financial aid. Greg just didn't do anything.
No. And then also, I feel like Earl could have maybe gotten into some places, like, at the same shot as Greg, because I feel like at some point they mentioned that Earl's grades were actually really good because he was in
the lower classes.
So Greg made it seem like it was a walk in the park, but it might not have been. We don't really know. But he had good grades, and to me, it seemed like Earl ended up doing most of the work on the films, that Greg would, like, kind of come up with the idea, and then Earl did more of the work. But I could be wrong about that. So it kind of seemed like Earl deserved to go to school for film more than Greg. And then he's just like, but I'm gonna go work at a Wendy's.
And Greg was like, okay, see ya, white privilege, bye. We talked a little bit about this and said that our dream ending for Earl, maybe our favorite character in the book, person-wise.
Yeah, I liked him.
Yeah. Our dream ending for Earl would be for Greg's dad, who's great and loves Earl, to, like, offer to, like, take him to the admissions board at the school where he works and, like, maybe help get him in. Just something. Earl deserves something. Earl is a great guy, and he doesn't deserve to just fall into the poverty cycle that his family is kind of stuck in.
Also, Greg is kind of like a bad friend. He, like, kind of just ditches him, and the epilogue doesn't really make it seem like they're close friends anymore, which is very strange considering that Earl was pretty much his only friend. And Earl was really close with his family. Like, it seems like, especially Greg's dad was really close with him. So it was, as someone who's very much prioritizes sticking with your friends, Greg needs to do a better job.
Yeah.
It kind of seemed like Earl was doing that Perks thing where he was accepting the love he thought he deserved, which was Greg, who was kind of a terrible friend. Let's be honest, he was very, very self-centered, and even though he was aware that he was self-centered, he didn't do anything to fix it, and Earl ended up pulling most of the weight in the friendship, and he definitely could have picked a better friend than Greg.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the epilogue itself was a bit weird. I thought it was weird that he almost addressed it to a college, but it felt very, like, casual. And that threw me off a lot.
I see why it was written in the way it was written, because casual is just Greg's style, but I don't know any rational human being who would send something so casual and also dirty at some points. Like, Earl's language and stuff is never edited. I feel like it's very unrealistic that he would send that to a college. I felt like it should have been a journal. It could have been an explanation written to Earl or to Rachel, like, in her memory, to anyone. It didn't make sense that it would go to something as official as a college.
Also, colleges don't read people's novels as, like, a form as admissions. Like, I don't know what kind of college application Greg is doing, but it's not a thing.
Overall, we both enjoyed Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, but I think we agree that it definitely had some flaws in there. But if you want both a touching read and a good laugh at points, it's a pretty good book to pick up. We both gave it 4 stars, so not bad.
Even though this video has kind of made it seem like we hate it. We didn't hate it. I just feel like it could have easily been a 5-star book if there had just been a little bit more of a push.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard that the movie might fix a lot of the problems that we have with the book, so I think we might check that out if we can ever get our hands on it. It was never in theaters around us, so after we see the movie, we might update you on our opinion. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you want to find us some more places on the internet, we have some links down there, and we will see you guys soon. Bye!